Welcome back to the second part of today's convention, and I'm proud to present the next speaker, which is Ryan. So, yeah, no clapping for you.
Thank you.
Right,
Hello everyone, thank you for coming to Manchester today to listen to my presentation. I also sometimes go by the name drawntothenorth.com, refusing to put my actual name on my work for reasons unknown. So during this presentation, I'm going to be talking about self-development for freelancers. I've chosen to talk about freelance because I feel that there's a huge part of it which is all about mental game. So during this project, I'm going to talk about a client project that I worked on last year, which is Project Neon. I'm also going to talk about how I solved some of the design problems that I came up against during that project. I'm then going to talk about deliberate practice, which I know is a topic that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but I'm just going to go into it again because I feel like it's something that we've all heard of, but we actually don't apply. I'm then going to go over some time-saving tips and a story that I came across a few years back. And then finally, I'm going to wrap up with some classical self-development stuff, which is mindset. Okay, so just to give you a background and a bit of an intro into my own education and experience, my background wasn't actually anything to do with architecture or design. I actually started out in high school. I think I studied fine art, graphic design and media studies, which at the time, to be honest, I didn't put 100% effort in, to say the least. And so after that, I went to uni and I studied illustration and animation. And during that time, it was a bit all over the place again, going into different areas. I would study screen printing, metal plate etching, stop motion animation, traditional animation. And it was about halfway into that course that I came across the FZD YouTube channel. And it kind of introduced me to perspective and digital painting. And I remember watching one of these videos by Feng and all these perspective lines. Oh, sorry, that's Feng Zhu. I'm sure most of you have heard. And all these perspective lines flashed on the screen. I was like, oh, wow, what is this? And so that got me into digital painting, and I got my first Wacom tablet halfway into the school. And that kind of projected me then. I decided that this is what I wanted to do. So at the end of that, I had a really bad portfolio, and I just took a regular job. And due to some kind of sad circumstances in my family, I came into a bit of money, and a year later I was like, right, now's the time. I'm going to go to FZD, I'm going to get the foundation, I'm going to get the fundamentals down, and that was it. So I went over there, and as I'm sure some of you have heard, it's very intense, a lot of work, a lot of pressure, and I came out, had the fundamentals, the perspective, the rendering, I had some idea which I was lacking before I went in. And so I slowly started to build up my freelance career, and since then I've worked on everything from experiential advertising, theme park, VR games, architectural design advanced architectural concept design, film, you name it. So it's been a really varied freelance career, and I've had a really kind of broad experience rather than working at one or two specific companies. So I'd just like to start out this talk by just going into architecture, because it's been my passion for the last few years. So I began to focus on this stuff because I really liked modern architecture, especially the new organic forms that are built in the last decade by firms such as Zaha Hadid, Santiago Calatrava and MAD Architects. I just wanted to explore how to create these forms that were difficult to do by hand and really difficult to do in 3D. So I started to test different programs and methods in Modo, ZBrush, Blender, and even tried Rhino's Grasshopper, which for those of you, I don't know if you've tried it, it's notoriously quite technical and complicated. So I was just trying to come up with different ways to create procedural and parametric designs. And this skyscraper that you can see here was actually created in Rhino's Grasshopper. But I actually found it too slow to create the forms that I wanted to. And for those of you who have experimented with it, you know it's like very node-based, similar to Blender's shader editor. So in the end, I actually managed to kind of come up with a workaround in Modo. And in Modo, I would stack multiple procedural operations. And using instances and particles in certain ways, I would begin to achieve these complex forms. I know in the recent years that Blender, you can also do this stuff like geometry nodes, right? And I've also experimented with things like 3D Coat and ZBrush, Moi and Fusion. And I also know that for the people who do use ZBrush who are here today, you've got things like NanoBrush, where you can create forms of a complex surface, repeating forms, quite quickly and easily. So it was the result of this experimentation that led on to some great client work. And one of those great clients was Neom. So for those of you who are not familiar with Neom, Neom is a megacity being built in Saudi Arabia. The project includes building several islands off the coast, and this went on for several months, where I contributed concept designs that were centered around ease of mobility, zero carbon emissions, renewable energy, advanced materials, and also how we could minimize damage to the natural environment. It was while working on Neom, I also faced some of the most complex design problems that I've had to solve during my freelance career. One of the two projects I contributed to, The Line, is a 170 kilometers long, mirrored skyscraper structure, and it runs all the way from the desert and into the mountain area. So it provided a really kind of varied landscape that we had to consider. So some of the main design problems that I had to solve included having all the amenities for the people living there to be within a short walking distance, how we could incorporate advanced mobility, such as air taxis, making sure the architecture was built with the complex landscape and topography in mind, dealing with high temperatures during the day and thinking about how to keep the natural environment intact. I have no formal architectural or structural engineering background, so doing a lot of research in a short amount of time was crucial. And it was actually while I was doing this research that I found some of the best solutions that I came across were already solved, and some came from unexpected places. So one of those places was biomimicry. And biomimicry just means to take the ideas from nature and apply them to your design problem. So in this case, I found, or should say I came across, the shape of the cactus. And the shape of the cactus allows it to cool naturally. So this is just something we could take and say apply it to the facade of the building, maybe covering it in plants and things like that. The next thing I came across was that we could position buildings in a certain way to allow the wind to pass through. And this came actually from Singapore's city planning, where they have positioned the buildings in a certain way to cool the pedestrians and the residents living there. Some solutions were just quite simple. The idea of being on holiday and the floor just being too hot to walk on with bare feet gave me the idea that we could just add simple shades in areas which would have a lot of people walking across them. And then another idea came from a team in Colombia that created bricks with vents in them, allowing the building to cool. And then one of my more favourite kind of design solutions that I came across while doing this research was that lime absorbs CO2 from the atmosphere. And this came from finding out about Yasmin Lari's work creating post-disaster shelter designs in Pakistan. And these were made from just simple materials like bamboo, mud and lime. So just to summarise that, it was all about just combining these ideas from researching new technology, looking to other disciplines, personal memories, using nature, and I managed to create architecture designs that not only absorbed carbon from the atmosphere, they used very little electricity to cool, they dealt with the heat of the desert, and they had all the amenities for the residents within a short walking distance. But you may be sat there thinking, that's all very well and good, but how do we apply this to game and film? So that design thinking of We just need to make sure we're solving the right problem and that problem adds the most value to the client. So we can do that by researching the current games, films and designs out there to understand the market better. Just keep up to date with game releases, look through some of those art of books, watch the playthroughs on YouTube. Although sadly, I had a conversation with Rudy about this and he says, no, you should play the games. So I'm going to change that and say, no, don't just watch the playthroughs, play the games as well. Take that time, okay? So once we've done this research, we can actually benchmark existing solutions and try to go beyond current standards. It's worth spending the time as well before just to read and do a bit of research on technology, history, design, and how things work. The most interesting design solutions I've come up with have always come from pushing the technology, exploring alternative functions, and having an interesting story. But to give you all a more specific problem that I came up against, I had a long contract working on a VR training simulator for engineers to learn how diesel generators worked. Changes and updates to the Oculus Mixed Reality Toolkit, the core functionality and physics of the VR control system and interactivity were coming out weekly while I was on this project. The team lead often spent hours researching what these updates were and ended up saving the team countless hours of work. I also learned what the technical limitations of the game were. In this VR project, it was running on an Android SDK only, and it wasn't wired to an external computer to take advantage of the graphics card. So this meant there were limitations to the complexity of the modelling and poly count in the environment. Understanding this limitation meant you didn't waste time designing something that is too intensive on the poly count. So having this idea for this huge atrium with a fancy glass chandelier and mega seat in the background, some of these designs, they're just not feasible. So being careful with glass shaders, making sure the models were properly LOD'd, that's the level of detail, all of which would have impacted the number of draw calls for the device to run on in the end. Some of these design decisions will come with experience, but reading articles, listening to game dev seminars, the team describes the issues and the limitations they came up against, and it will just give you a head start on how to design within those limitations. I'd also like to wrap up this section on service design, because very often we can just get straight into a project and dive right into it. But at one point, I'd managed to actually save a client just thousands of pounds by doing a simple search for an open source Lamborghini. And it would have cost the team thousands of pounds to model this from scratch. Another client actually suggested to use a stock photo of a particular location, and it cost hundreds of pounds. And I actually just managed to find the exact same one for free, which was on the Creative Commons. So the idea is also, not only can you try and solve the design problems for your client from the technical and design point of view, but also a bit of service design. So how can you save your clients like a bit of money? Your clients will always be grateful for that. Okay, so I'm just going to go into a little bit about deliberate practice. And I'm pretty sure most people have actually heard of this. Can I just see a quick show of hands who's actually heard of deliberate practice before? All right, so there's not as many as I hoped for an auditorium full of professionals, but okay, so I'll cover that now. Okay, so I'll just go over deliberate practice. So it's something we all need to do to stay on top of our game. So to practice deliberately means to stretch yourself beyond what you're currently able to do. It's about snapping yourself out of the autopilot way of doing things if you've been doing something for years. It's how to break out of a plateau and continue to improve. In my personal life and all the deliberate practice literature that I've read, you start by getting the best information, teacher, school that you can possibly find, and defining a specific part of what it is you currently do for improvement. You need to create measurements that define the improvement or the quality that you're after, and try and understand the steps in a process or the parts of a skill. You then need to break that process down into parts so that each part can be understood and practiced until correct. You then need to set a goal for the practice session and time limit, and it's actually putting yourself under this additional time pressure that'll force you to focus on only the most important parts. Then you need to go for as many repetitions as you possibly can. You might make many errors, and it's actually noticing these errors and correcting them is the key part of the learning process. After the session, reflect on what repeated mistakes you made, like how close you were to matching the benchmark or the quality bar that you've set for yourself. How could it have been better? Then set a goal for your next practice session. And I've written this section for people, and I've met a few over the last day, so I've been doing this for many years, 10, 15 years. And you may be thinking to yourself, okay, I'm in a bit of a plateau. How can I push myself out of that and continue to improve? And in my personal work, it's been exploring, experimenting, and learning new software that's actually led me to creating work I wasn't able to do previously. And it also increased my speed and landed me new clients. So another question we could ask ourselves is, how can I increase the difficulty? Can we put ourselves under additional time limits? Because it's putting yourself under that time pressure that naturally creates that anxiety and forces you to focus on only the most important parts. And it'll also reveal to you parts of your process that you can improve. Some other questions we can also ask ourselves could be, can I do the work correct the first time with no mistakes? This applies more to 2D skills. So when you're painting, are you constantly pressing Control Z, undo, undo? Can you force yourself to practice through illness and fatigue? I feel like this is particularly important because when you practice when you're feeling particularly tired, it actually builds those mental toughness skills so that when you're on the job, you're still able to deliver. Another tip could be to record your practice session and watch it back. Sometimes during a session, you'll be so in the process of what it is you're doing, you'll be unable to spot errors. And by just simply recording yourself while you practice, it's almost like an instant level up. It's like watching somebody else work, and you can get an instant improvement almost overnight. And then create checklists of your process and make sure you complete each one. Just to give an example of that checklist idea, this was a checklist that I wrote when I was still learning the rendering fundamentals. And I just listed out all the steps. I'm not going to go through them here because I know there's a lot on there. But this was just something that helped clarify not only the steps in a process, but also when it would go wrong. For example, very often you'll forget to add the AO where the form hits the ground. And then finally, I'd just like to wrap up this section by saying it's not about how many hours you put in. It's how many quality, correct repetitions you can do for the time that you have. With this industry, I feel that we all go in there and we need to pile in as many hours as we can and just push, push, push. And I think it's more useful actually to spend that time to reflect after each practice session, to ask yourself what's working, what's not, get feedback, compare, contrast, and really engage with each session and you'll improve that much faster. But just to prove to you all that, this isn't all talk, and I have actually done it. So all the way back in 2013, while I was still in school, the school broke down the 2D image making process all the way to simple shapes. Using just a pencil, paper, and ruler, we would practice simple cubes, spheres, cylinders, and cones, and also simplified vehicles and architecture. It was this way we learned the fundamentals of drawing in perspective. The amount of homework that was given was high, and going back to what we just mentioned about the deliberate practice, it meant we put the maximum number of repetitions into it for the time that we had. The assignments also grew steadily more difficult, from simple cubes to mirroring letters in all axes, to finally creating entire architectural scenes. And I'm not sure if you guys can actually make it out from up there, but that is actually the letter S mirrored in all axes. And doing these takes honestly a couple of days, and they're very painful. And we also applied the same thinking to rendering. So we focused on using light logic, and it was the exact same process of starting very simple shapes, simple forms, and slowly building the complexity from there to studying individual materials before finally applying that to more complex forms. And then, sadly, in 2013, this was about the highest level I was able to achieve. So there you go. And fast forward to today, I still continue to practice 2D skills, even though the industry is changing more and more to a completely 3D workflow. I still feel that there is the need to continue to practice the 2D aspect. And so in recent years, to improve my 2D skills, I've studied film stills. And the reason is because it has a combination of characters with the face showing, with full body, props, architecture in perspective, with an interesting lighting or mood. And the reason is because I would be able to practice all the fundamentals in one go. So you get your anatomy, your faces, your perspective, your form rendering, your materials, and then you would also pick up composition, lighting, cinematography from film at the same time. So talking about time, in this section I'll just cover some time saving and planning techniques that I've used in my own life, but I came across this story a while back and I thought it was really interesting, so I'm going to share it with you today. So at Great Ormond Street Hospital, a hospital known for its high level of childcare and childcare specialists, there was an issue that following congenital heart disease, many child patients were dying following surgery. The issue they found after analysis was the journey from the operating room to the intensive care unit was prone to error. Moving a small child following a surgery to intensive care involves the transfer and coordination of many wires, equipment, people and information. All of this has to be done within 15 minutes and it's transferred from the operating theatre system to portable equipment to intensive care systems. One day, after seeing the Formula 1 pit crew on TV, doctors there decided to visit a pit crew handoff in Italy. And in Formula 1, the pit stop team completes the complex task of changing tyres and fueling the car in about 7 seconds. After seeing this, they went back, recorded themselves, and they also had a member of the crew analyse what they did, and they focused more on the role of each person's task in reducing the time for the transfer of the equipment and the other errors during that handoff. But just to summarise the article, so using what they'd learned, they then gauged several measures. Before that new handover process and protocol, they had 30% of patient errors, and that occurred in both the equipment and the information handoff. After implementing this, the new protocol, it was reduced to less than 10%. And then on the right-hand side there, you can see a diagram of each of the doctors' and nurses' role in the procedure. And so it's just to put the idea there that by saving time and reducing errors, they're actually able to save the lives of their young patients. Now, luckily we're not here to save lives. We are producing artwork, so I understand that it's not anywhere near as serious. But I'd just like to share in this section just some tips I'm hoping can apply to everybody. So the first principle on how I like to manage my time and tasks is do only your most mentally demanding tasks first. And I say this because for me personally, tackling these most challenging tasks first in the day allows me to put all that energy into making sure those difficult designs get done and then save everything that is not as important till the very end of the day. I also use a modified version of Getting Things Done by David Allen. So I highly recommend picking up that book if you haven't heard of it. And I also use Evernote for taking notes, setting tasks, goals, reminders, doing research and so on. And I also use Google Calendar just to set future tasks and reminders. I also just use the desktop timer that comes with Windows for measuring and tracking time on tasks. This is really important because over time you'll become sensitive to how long tasks are taking you, breaks and what's slowing you down during the day. But most importantly, I actually use this to track active hours on task for freelance work. So I've got a picture here just to give you a quick idea of how that looks like and how I set things up. So on the left-hand side, you've got Evernote with an hour-by-hour breakdown and the stopwatch timer. So you're constantly aware of how much time is going by. So I'll start out each day by noting what's important to do today, what's coming up, and what needs to be done later. I'll then clear out the hour-by-hour schedule and set tasks starting with the most mentally demanding, highest value, most important first. Anything else gets added to Google Calendar or as a non-urgent reminder in a to-do list. And just to give it a quick example of how I like to use Google Calendar, and that's just a simple colour-coded system split between work and personal tasks. I also have notebooks and tasks separated into to-do lists and themes, similar to the getting things done method. So I'll have today's hour-by-hour to-do list, urgent and non-urgent lists, client projects, personal work practice, you get the idea. I'll also reflect on whether or not I achieve my goals I set for myself, what needs improvement, what's working, what isn't, and I'll also spend that first time in the morning just brainstorming solutions for upcoming problems. But just to wrap up that, here's some time-saving tools that I use. Again, Evernote. I found it incredibly useful over the years for just obviously taking notes, doing research, setting tasks, reminders, and all that stuff. I highly recommend it. The other one is OneTab. Can I say a quick show of hands? Does anybody here actually use OneTab already or has heard of it? Okay, that's almost, okay, one or two people. So we all do like a lot of research, and many of us have dozens of tabs open in Chrome, right? So at the click of one button, it consolidates them all down to just one, and it also adds a time and a date to that, so you can pull it back up from the past. Say you did some research months ago. So it's an incredibly quick and easy way to save yourself a bit of time. Then the next one, just always use the stopwatch. I constantly use the stopwatch and just the basic desktop timer to log hours and just to make sure that I'm not going over time on certain things. The next one is one-click download. Again, we're constantly saving images from the internet. One-click download, it's just a small icon that hovers over the image, and it just saves you that little tiny bit of time that it takes to right-click and save as. But for us in our industry, how many tens, if not hundreds of pictures that we sometimes save in a day? So the next one is 1Password. We're all logging in out of passwords. Sometimes we have to log into client websites. This is just a simple tool, I believe it's paid, that just saves you that time from having to log into different things. It's 1Password, it logs you into them all. And then the last few, I'm sure are obvious. The last one in particular, so using outsourcers. This is something we all know and do, and it's something I found to save me a lot of time over the years, and I'm sure everyone in here has probably heard of that one, but setting your mouse speed to the highest. This is something that slips under your radar. If your hand has to move less across the mouse pad, it's a microsecond of time. But over the course of the day, the week, the years, it all adds up. Just set it to the highest and get used to it, and you'll save time. And the same thing applies just to keyboard shortcuts. I'll often watch people work and the hands flying all over the keyboard. Think like a professional gamer, right? The fingers just stay right there, they're doing this the entire time. And then obviously just all the money you can to get every script and plugin for your application, it's always worth it. I know those are very general, but I've tried to think about how to save time for everybody in the room. And I hope you can implement those into your workflow. So now I'd just like to share this quote with you all, and that's, does this current action or behaviour significantly improve the quality of the service or product, and if not, stop those efforts? Now, apparently this is attributed to Elon Musk when he was asked where to spend the money when talking about marketing and advertising for Tesla. But I've applied this thinking when I have multiple decisions and I'm unsure what to do next. So for me, I always ask myself, if I just get started right now, what can I do that will significantly improve the quality of my work? So I'd like to lead that into mindset. And so in this section, I'd just like to share some time-saving techniques, mental tools, and just other tips as well to help you improve as a freelancer. So I'll start out by just sharing some of the bad experiences as a freelancer. And I don't know if anybody has had any of these themselves. So one of them was clients making up their own currency rate. And the only way that I know to overcome this is just to make sure before you start, have a contract in place so that if anything does go wrong with payment or anything like that, that you're covered. The next one, being asked to photo bash world famous, easily recognised IPs into your work. And I'm sorry to say this has happened a few times, and I'll leave it to you to decide whether or not you continue working with them. But if someone does ask you to do that, just understand that you need to make sure that you're covered, because it could land you in a lot of trouble. And then the next one, having work deleted by team members during an assignment. I know people have mentioned using online mood boards like Miro and other things like that. Whether it's by accident or on purpose, we don't know. But when you're on the job and you are working in a big team, at the end of it, if you've done something which is collaborative with other people and they can edit it, just take a snapshot and deliver that at the end of the day, and that way you're covered. And then finally, just being late to every meeting and late paying. Again, there's some of these issues that you'll come up against as a freelancer, and some of them you can do something about, and other things you have no control over. So that's just a bit of warning for the people who are thinking about making the switch. And then now I'd just like to cover art direction. So some of the best art direction that I've had has been very easy to understand. They've used paint overs and images. They've given clear direction on what was needed. They understood the skills of the team, and they use them well for the tasks. And then I've also had experiences of the opposite, where the art director may come from an entirely different industry, so they're not quite aware of what your workflow may be or whatever it is. So they're not quite sure of how long it takes to complete a task. Always tell them, always let them know, okay, well, I may need more time for this particular thing. And then sometimes there'll be assigned tasks that you have no skill in. To give the example that I mentioned before in the VR project, I actually had to learn Unity while I was on the job, and the team leader was completely fine with that. So he gave me that time to learn a little bit of Unity in order to test certain things. And then I've also had issues where the feedback hasn't been clear. And sometimes it's just a case because the art director's forgotten the brief and the IP guidelines. So you might get conflicting feedback. So just all of these things, these are just some of the things to be aware that you may come up against. And then finally, just to wrap up a bit more like self-development type things for freelancers. So get to the point. So certain things we can ask ourselves are, am I solving the right problem? What is the outcome here? Is this the fastest way to achieve it? Going straight into a job with this mindset, you'll just get to that problem, get it solved as fast as you possibly can. And there'll always be issues as well which come up, which I'll go over in a second with how to deal with. But just go as fast as you can. Then transparency. And when I'm sat with the work, when I'm at work, I imagine that the client is sat with me. And what I mean by that is I wouldn't do anything like go to YouTube, watch cat videos, slack off, play a bit of League of Legends, whatever. So while you're at work, just imagine that you're actually there with them and you won't do anything, that you wouldn't do while you're at work. So that's that. Now, a bit more mindset. So every hour counts. Prioritize tasks, estimate time for tasks, and measure. I've included measure at the end, and I know I've gone on and on during this talk about time and measurement, but I really do feel like it's something important, because the more you do it, the more time sensitive you'll get, and you'll be able to better create those estimates. Then finally, we've got low-level thinking late, and that's just, again, do those most mentally demanding tasks first, when you are freshest. Rest and recovery. You've got to alternate between hard and difficult tasks. So what I mean by that is sometimes you'll be trying to solve a design problem that's particularly difficult, and you'll be putting your mind to it, and you'll be struggling, trying to push through, and your head will just be slamming against the wall. So in order to overcome those times, which I'm sure many of you have faced, try to solve something within the task that is easier, and you'll find that you'll start to get the ball rolling a bit. And then finally, just when you're ill, do the least challenging tasks and practice and prepare. Sometimes you really are you can hardly do anything. And during those times, I like to practice, prepare, or just do something that's very, very easy. Ending the day with reflection. So you could ask yourself at the end of the day, what issues came up during the work? How can this be better and faster? Create lists and implement that into your workflow. And again, time and measure everything. Now in this section, I'd just like to cover some more tips on what we can do to predict failure and prevent disaster. And this idea, or at least the application that I came across, was in structural engineering. And in building structures, they're actually designed to take much more load or stress than they need as a safety measure. To think about this in another way, when they go to design bridges, bridges are designed to take much more weight than they could possibly, that they are used on a day-to-day basis, right? So how can we actually apply this margin of safety thinking to our day-to-day lives? Time. Always add in extra estimates forever. Something will always come up. There'll always be a distraction, an emergency, a delivery, whatever it is, and it will always come up and take away your time. Your software will crash, your hardware will break. So try to factor in a margin of safety into that, and you'll always be covered. And I've just got a few other things that we can use, or tools, mental tools we can utilize, and that's a single point of failure. And I believe this comes from software engineering, and it means to think in a way that says, what parts of this, if it were to go wrong, would it cause it all to fail? I know there's a few people in here as well which are running their own studios or they're managing big projects. So another one to use is post-mortem. In the middle of a project, go into the future and assume that the project has failed. What caused it to fail? What were those things that would cause this particular project to fail or not pull through? And then also think about the worst case scenario. What is the worst case and what can we do to mitigate that? By thinking ahead of time of what the worst case scenario is and just creating some things that we can do to stop those situations from happening, you'll have much less anxiety going into those situations. And then finally, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. And this comes from the US Navy SEALs, and it just simply means to always have a backup and always have a contingency plan. And now, this is the last slide, and this isn't one of my designs. I mentioned in a previous slide that all the way back in 2013, I went over to Singapore. And during my time there, I lived with a Singaporean family. And the workload there is very intense. There's a lot of pressure, and you're not sleeping. You go and put yourself under all this pressure, and you're like, super tired, doing loads of homework. And I would come home at the end of the day, and there would be, stood there, a 4-year-old Singaporean boy who would shoot me, bully me, punch me, kick me. But one day I came home, and he built this. And I came over to him and I said, "What is it?" He goes, "It's a house." It's a house. And in Singapore, the most people, they live in high-rise blocks. You see, if I was a kid and I built a house, it would be a small brick thing. Because he lived in Singapore, it was a high-rise. So I thought it was a really cool design, so I snapped a picture of it. But it was just a reminder for me to make sure that I enjoyed what I was doing, because I realised that, you're going to be doing this a very long time. So really enjoy those day-to-day practice sessions, because like I say, you're going to be in this thing for a very, very long time. So that just wraps up this talk. If you're interested in seeing more of the work on the following slides, you can go to developmentfornorth.com. Thank you all for listening.
Right, thank you very much, Ryan, for that talk. There was a couple
you.
of tips there that I think I'll be taking forward with me.
Yeah.
I think we've got time for a couple of questions. So if anyone's got any questions, please raise your hands.
Hello, thanks. I was just wondering, you had like a lot of time-saving tips in there. What do you personally do for, to just completely shut off and kind of,
Yeah, like I was saying during the talk, I know a lot of us, we work very long hours. I do take time off, it's not all work. I like to get out, exercise, travel. I make sure to set aside that time, at least, once per week, just to get out, just relax, close the computer down, don't do anything at all. Exercise for me has been particularly important. I use it to relax. I like to go for runs around the park, things like that. Travel as well, to definitely refresh your batteries. In fact, I know everyone goes on about travel, but every time I travel, I come away with it, not only with tons of references to use in your work, right? But it also, you end up learning just so much. about other countries and people, and it all feeds into your work as well. Yeah. So.
All right, cool. Yeah, and just as a follow-up question, you mentioned this, just my personal curiosity, this NEOM project, did you get to go there? Is it ongoing? Is it shaping up in any form? And if yes, also, do you believe in the project? Like, what happens if sometimes you get a task and they have, certain way of laying it out, but you might do the job, but you're not on board with maybe.
Okay, so to repeat the question, so the first part was, is NEOM still going ahead, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're given a task and you don't agree with the feedback, how do I handle it?
No, sorry, not the feedback, like maybe just, let's say no, that's a difficult, but maybe it's a question for later. But basically, for example, so I personally don't really believe it might be feasible to build so much infrastructure in the desert. Maybe they're right, maybe I'm wrong and so on. But for example, if I was really conservative, but I got this task, hey, we are planning this utopia and it's going to be amazing, but you're like, so.
Yeah, it does seem unbelievable. And when I first joined the project, I was skeptical as well. I've had other people say to me, why build it in a line? That seems very awkward. What happens if you need to quickly get to the other side? So they are utilising technologies like the Hyperloop, right? Futuristic technologies and things like that, air taxis. I believe they have started the construction, or at least the very, very early stages. So it is going ahead as far as I know. They do have a website. I'll definitely go online and check. But as far as I know, it is going ahead. I know it does seem like a project that is so out there and massive in scale that it doesn't seem like it would, but as far as I know, so far it is actually going ahead. Yeah.
All right, cool, thanks.
Hi, thanks for the talk. So this question might come across as confrontational, but there was a part in the presentation where you talked about pushing through fatigue and illness.
Yeah.
And you obviously said there was sort of benefits to that, but I'd only ever see the negative side of that, honestly. I mean, is there data to back that up, I suppose?
Yeah, I can understand where you're coming from. I'm not trying to advocate people to make themselves very ill.
Of course, yeah.
But I don't want anybody to come out of here and go, right, that's it, I'm going to put myself in hospital. No, it's not the point. The point I'm trying to make is those days when you do feel a little tired and you sat there and you're deciding whether or not to practice and you kind of feel like putting it off. I always say to myself, no, I'm going to practice anyway. And even if the practice session isn't as effective, I still make myself sit there just to keep the habit going. Yeah, I'm not suggesting to anyone to go out.
I understand that. Yeah. I was curious.
Okay, I hope that clarifies it. Okay.
Yeah, that's all right.
All right.
I kind of got two unrelated questions. But the first one was that thing about the limestone absorbing all the CO2. Did you find out anything interesting in your research and any cool applications of that while you were looking into it?
Yeah, so the lime that's been used as a construction material, it's been used in other industries as well. I mean, I did this research last year, so a lot of it I've forgotten, but using lime for other applications other than what it's been used for is known. Like I say, during that project, I just had to do as much research as I could into figuring out different ways we could keep those buildings cool. And like I say, absorb the CO2 from the atmosphere and all those other things. So a lot of the research I did at that time, if I came across it and I thought it may work, I put it forward to the team.
And my other question was, that thing about the point of failure was a really interesting way of looking at sort of management strategies for yourself. I remember hearing someone say, design a defense to have a weak point that purposely fails so it draws someone into the place they didn't want to go in the first place. Can you imagine any improvements on your management strategies that you're doing already? Because I like how organised you are. Clearly it's some discipline from where you started off, studying it in Singapore and stuff. Have you got any obvious improvements that you would make on your self-management?
I'm always constantly trying to just think and get feedback on how to improve everything. I'm constantly just reflecting at the end of the day on what's working, what isn't. Very often as well, these improvements will actually not come from within. Sometimes it doesn't matter how many questions you ask yourself, the improvements will come from outside. So looking outside, researching, exploring and testing different things will give you those improvements and those leaps that you need. Sometimes actually reflecting too much can be a closed loop. So coming out of that, looking at others, getting advice, whatever, exploring, traveling, like I mentioned before, it'll give you perspective, and that will allow you to make that leap. Yeah.
So kind of stay flexible, basically. Listen to
Yeah.
yourself with things.
Yeah.
So you said you attended things through school, like in your career. I just wondered if you could take one thing you learned from that entire process, like going there and training under all the amazing artists there. What would you say?
So the question was, what would I...
Like if you could take one thing you learned from that, summarize it, what would you say?
Say one thing from... I think going in, before I went to FZD, I know it's known for the intensity of the work ethic. It was just simply that how much I didn't know going in about the fundamentals, just something simple as the fundamentals. I learned so much just in the first 6 months of being there about the basics of 2D image making. But it was also the focus on the amount of work you had to do and the very short deadlines that we were given. It really did force you to work under time limits and put you under a lot of pressure. So actually, if you are somebody who's self-learning, that would be my advice. If you're the person that can't, you can't do it or for whatever reason, or you want to just take the self-learning route, go for as many repetitions as you possibly can. Give yourself a high volume of work. You're going to also need someone else to look over your work as well. So let's say you take an online course and the homework is something like do 2 or 3, do 10. I know that's advice we've all heard before, but give yourself a high volume of work and no time. I know that sounds intense, but that's honestly the truth. And that's that is the course. But it is generally supposed to be focused on learning the fundamentals and pushing design. But the mental attitude going in is a high volume of work, really short deadlines, and just really pushing yourself. Yeah.
That's great, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry. I was just wondering, so sometimes when you see people fresh out of this uni in Singapore, their portfolios are quite similar. Yeah. And so I was surprised to hear that you've been there, because looking at your work now, you wouldn't guess that. So good job. I mean, I guess from coming this far, maybe it's because you learned all the programs in 3D and so on. So kind of it might be ironic that you learned how to do all the perspective lines, how to draw it, but now the AI or the software is kind of doing it for you. So I was just wondering the question would be that this mental fortitude to do this hard work and doing all those things, if maybe that was something that the school taught you, or maybe you've been this way even before that.
So just to repeat the question, so the first part, students' work coming out of school generally looking the same. I think that's because when people go in, like I did at the time, and if I actually flash back to 2013, it generally looks the same as well. And it's purely because you go in there as a complete beginner or very low skill. So everybody kind of comes out looking the same. But I guess the idea is, to defend them, is that their design solutions will be different. So even though the way the work is done comes out looking the same, the thinking behind it should be unique with each student. But then the other part was, I guess the other part was, are the skills still useful?
Yeah, kind of this mindset that you have the discipline to do all those things and stick to it. If that is something which this environment helped you learn and accomplish, or maybe if this is something inherent to you personally, which has always been there.
Okay, I'll start by saying absolutely not. No, I was, I absolutely was not a hard-working student at all. I can tell you as a teenager, I had very little work ethic. It was something that just my friends around me at the time just didn't push themselves hard in the work or anything like that. It's just uncommon to push yourself that hard in just where I grew up or whatever. Just it was unheard of. You don't say, oh yeah, I'm putting tons and tons of hours into this, man. Yeah, that all came much later, which I don't regret. Like I say, it was a very intense experience. You know, no sleep, going as hard as you can until the early hours of the morning, and yeah, I have no regrets about it. But to summarize, no, I wasn't like that before. The school instills that in you. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
I think that wraps up Ryan's chat.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can we get another round of applause for him?
Thank you. All right. Okay.